Welcome to CBR's Dynamic Duos podcast. I'm your host for this episode, Brian Cronin, and our dynamic duo for today are Eisner Award-winning creators Eric Powell and Becky Cloonan, who are here to discuss Four Gathered on Christmas Eve, a new collection of stories from Dark Horse Comics that will be out on December 19th. Welcome, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Hello.
So, Eric, I know that all readers of all listeners of Dynamic Duo, they all know about the Victorian tradition of ghost stories. But just in case that perhaps some friend of theirs is listening with them that doesn't know about it as much, could you give a quick rundown of the tradition?
Well, I wouldn't say that I'm a, historian and know, the origins of this or anything, but to my knowledge, it was a bit of a tradition in Victorian times and before to share ghost stories on Christmas Eve. The idea for this book kind of came about when I was rewatching the 1981 movie Ghost Story, which is based on a good, really good Peter Straub book, where these old men create a little group, a club, and sit around a fire and have drinks and tell each other ghost stories or try to scare each other. And it just had me thinking, like, I was kind of envious of them because that isn't something that I could really do. It seems a little weird today that people would sit around. Yeah, we could do that.
We could totally do that. We're neighbors.
How many people could we actually bring in on that, though? I don't know.
I bet we could find a ton of people. So many people to make it happen.
Well, okay, we might actually make this happen. But anyway, I was a little envious of them because I thought how fun that would be to actually sit around a fire and have some whiskey and tell ghost stories. And it had, started me thinking about, that tradition of Christmas Eve ghost stories and everything. And I had been thinking for a while about doing something Christmas related with ghost stories. And I thought, it would be cool to take that concept of sitting around telling ghost stories and do that with some comic creators. And luckily, I was able to bring along Mignola and Becky and James Heron and to contribute to this thing.
Fascinating. So how was it? Did you pick the three other creators, or I know you have Katie O'Brien as the editor on this, and
yes.
She's obviously done Mike's comics for many years now. Did Dark Horse help with selection, or was it all your calls?
No, this was actually a project that started when before I merged Albatross with Dark Horse. This project was actually in the works, and we canceled it because it didn't seem like it would make any sense once we made the deal to move over as an imprint, to put out this one book, have it out there for a while, have to scrap it, and then republish it at Dark Horse. So, these creators, I'm a huge fan of their work. So that's why, that's where the choice was made. I picked, people that, I thought would really be into this idea. So that was the only like litmus test. It was,
Yeah, and we were really into it. We were all really into it.
Yeah.
You chose well.
Was this something, Becky, that you had an interest in beforehand? Or obviously, I know horror stories, you're great at them. But is this something, this tradition, that's something that you had an interest as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think the classic example, if you're not familiar with it, is probably Dickens' like A Christmas Carol. because that's like spooky Christmas story with ghosts. But a lot of these stories that were told, like M.R. James stuff, F. Marion Crawford, like it's not Christmas ghost stories. They're just ghost stories. They're weird. They're like some of them are like, you get to the end and you're like, what?
Yeah.
What just happened? I think it might just be like more of a British thing, because I know that during Christmas they'll do like M.R. James adaptations and things like that, and it's kind of become a thing. But definitely like one of the greatest things. I mean, you could see it in like Nightmare Before Christmas, that mix of like spooky Halloween, and like no one really wants Halloween to end. Like Halloween's over and all of a sudden it's like Mariah Carey and like, Tinseltown, and like everything's just like, yeah, it's great. We love it. But also like, can it still be spooky for a bit more? Like we can have that.
Yes.
And we can have that in this book. That's what we're doing.
And Becky makes a good point. I mean, these aren't necessarily ghost stories based on Christmas. It's ghost stories told at Christmas.
Yeah.
And and I personally think that there's a lot of spooky things about Christmas. I mean, I think part of the reason that it exists as a holiday was, it is the middle of winter.
Right.
And people are trying to brighten, that up a little bit. There's a lot of, it's dark and there's a lot of
all the spooky gifts.
All the spooky gifts.
I only give spooky gifts this season.
Only. That's interesting when you mention Dickens' Christmas Carol, which, of course, as a note for the readers of this book, this gathering happens to take place on a very specific year.
It's awesome that you picked up on that. I appreciate it.
But that is interesting. You mentioned how Dickens is what we think of as ghost stories. At Christmas, we all think of Dickens. But Dickens, as you mentioned, he took it to the Christmas connection, bringing up forgiveness and changing a new leaf, while everyone else is just doing horror stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what this collection. This is not something This is a great gift for Christmas, but you could read this easily all year round.
Yeah, and we don't have anything socially redeemable in our stories.
Oh, no.
So we missed the Dickens mark.
Nor would we want to.
Yeah.
The book opens up with a framing sequence with each of the creators being a character. Now, Eric, you're the writer for that one. Did everyone, Becky, did you have any say on Becky's character in the book, Rebecca's character in the story? Or
Well, I showed everyone the script and the kind of like a short little pitch of what I wanted to do, and I warned them that I was going to make us all terrible. And everyone seemed really great. I think Becky put it best when she was like, "These are like our D&D characters," So. Yeah, I had to be careful though, because I was drawing us all not very flatteringly, and so I had to make sure that I drew myself as the most decrepit, so no one would get mad at me. So the depiction of myself in that is very unflattering.
I have a pet goose in the whole thing too, which was quite fun for me.
It is fascinating how each of the creators has, if I believe, everyone has a little bit of a reference to their work, right?
Mm-hmm.
But just done Victorian style.
Yeah.
Very clever.
Well, that was the thing. I think everyone kind of contributed a little bit of their backstory. Like I kind of came up with a loose concept, and I think out of the three, Mignola came up with the most descriptive of what his character was. He's a poet and he's on opium or something like that. He was like, had a lot to it. Becky, I don't want to give anything away because it ties into the end of the story, but Becky came up with some very important things dealing with the goose.
I don't even remember that.
Yeah.
I write my emails in a haze, a flurry. So if
Yeah.
I did, that's fun. But it was the goose was my favorite part. I've always wanted a pet goose. So
How did you come to the point of you wrote James's story? Was James not interested in? Did you have a story set, or did you write that story specifically for James?
No, I asked if he wanted to do a story, and then I think it was a couple weeks later he mentioned, would it be okay to bring in a writer, because I don't, he wasn't real comfortable. I don't know if it was the format that we were working with, or whatever, but he was having trouble coming up with something. I said, well, I'll write something for you if you want. And then I kind of pitched him on a loose idea, and he jumped at it. So that's kind of how that happened.
I like how it definitely ties in with that astral, sort of almost a Victorian ultra mega to a certain extent.
Yeah, I was trying to do something that would play up his style a little bit, and kind of the basis for that story is during that time, they thought there was another planet because Mercury had a odd orbit. So all of the, astronomers of that time thought that there was another planet. They even named it. It was called Vulcan, but it didn't exist. Mercury just had a weird orbit. So I used that as kind of like the basis to do this story. And then we kind of did a haunted house and a Victorian version of space, which is kind of weird, but wanted to make it a little different.
That's amazing that the history that you worked in the history of the real life history of that fake planet, because Neptune literally was discovered by a mathematician.
Yeah, because of the
who
orbits.
Decided that based on the orbits, there had to be a planet there.
Mm-hmm.
Years before anyone knew there actually was a planet there. And can
That's
you
crazy.
imagine the math of that? And that is what led, as you say, someone assumed there must be a planet because Mercury's orbit is weird too.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
that's some real math.
That's some real math.
Amazing math.
I've never done that. I've never done math like that in my life.
I'm terrible. I'm terrible at math. I could never be an astronomer.
Becky, now your story, it fit. When I was reading it, it was struck by how much it seemed like it could just almost be one of the by chance of Providence stories. It fits so neatly. It fits so well in that genre. What drew you to this? In the sense, was this an idea you've had before, or just came up with just fresh for this Christmas story?
Well, I've always liked the idea of a Kelpie. I mean, it's like a scary ghost horse, kind of evil horse, lives in the water. Not very nice. That's my thing. Like, I'm into it. So I've always kind of wanted to do a Kelpie story, and didn't really know where that was. How am I going to find time to do it? What's my excuse for doing this comic? I didn't have any reason to. So when Eric, of course, is like, do you want to do this story? And I was like, how can I put my Kelpie story in there? So it has been kind of floating around in there. And the twist is that it's a Victorian person telling a ghost story about someone from even a ghost from someone even longer ago, like the English Civil War time period. So it's kind of fun to do an old ghost story, but then there's an even older ghost in the ghost story. Yeah, and it was just it kind of came about very organically, which is my favorite way for things to come about. Yeah. And I think the fact that it feels a lot like my By Chance or Providence stories, I think when I get to do things that are on my, if you ask me anything I want to do, it'll just be something like that.
Gotcha.
I don't want to draw cars. I want to draw horses. I don't want to draw guns. I want to draw swords.
And creepy grins from ghostly figures, right?
Creepy grins, yeah.
I noticed you also rhyming. How hard was that? There's
a couple rhymes in there that were a little tricky, but for the most part, I mean, sometimes I worry it's like, oh, is this too sing-songy? Is it like a little silly? But so many of my favorite poems are like rhyming verse, and I just love it. Even if it's like, maybe goes a little too hard into the rhymey verse. It seems like 12
It's
pages is like
funny.
a perfect time.
Half the stories end up rhyming, right? Because Mike's
Yeah,
story also has rhyming
yeah.
in it.
I was glad I wasn't the only one doing it. It's nice when you've got like a partner in rhyme. But
Yeah, I was pretty blown away by Becky's story. She told me that, oh, I'm going to do it as like a poem. And I was like, that sounds cool, And then, when she turned the story in and I actually had a chance to read it, I was like, wow, this is just way cooler. I mean, I thought it would be rad, but it was turned out even cooler than I thought it would.
well, thank you.
Now, on your story, Eric, is there a particular inspiration for your story?
Yeah, I was trying to do just straight up M.R. James, just a Victorian ghost story. So I kind of I wove a little bit of British history in there, and I was definitely trying to capture that vibe. So that's kind of where that came from.
It's interesting that now with Mike Flanagan on Netflix, all the turning of the Henry James,
Oh
Edgar
yeah,
Allan
turn of the
Poe.
screw.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
Yeah.
So all these ghost stories. So all the public nowadays, they're now ready for this. They know that this is a thing.
I just don't know how kids are going to go back and read that stuff, though, when they see the Netflix version of Fall of the House of Usher or something. They're going, this isn't like, where's the rave?
The Poe stuff is so good, though. Like, there's so many
It's
weird
amazing.
things. Like,
Yeah.
the murders at the Rue Morgue, it's such a weird story. And the death in that is, like, just gross. And I don't know. I think there's still so much there to, like, really get into. Like, if you like this, check out the source material. It's even weirder.
Yeah.
I was just telling Eric that the Pit and the Pendulum was a Christmas horror story.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't think I knew that either.
It was in 1849. It was an anthology, just like this, an anthology of horror stories for Christmas. That apparently, as we said, you can get a copy for $750 right now on eBay.
Well,
Which seems low for an original, like, first print Poe book.
yeah.
That does seem low.
Maybe it's not in good shape.
I guess they were just so popular that these books are.
Yeah. Well, it's good. The classics never go out of style. That's what they say.
Yeah.
What I liked also in the stories that that make up this collection is that one of the key things about classic Victorian Christmas stories was it wasn't all Victorian manners and everything like that. There was a mix. There would be the lower stories, and then there'd be the manor houses and haunted and creepy. And what you guys did in this collection was great by mixing up the styles, and everyone had their own little thing, and that's very impressive.
Yeah, originally my original intent for this was everyone was going to do their story in black and white.
Oh.
And then when Mike was finished with his, he asked if it would be okay to do it in color because he thought the art wouldn't come across the same without some color on it. And I said, sure. And then when I mentioned it to James and Becky, it's like, Mike's going to do his story in color. So you guys can do yours in color too if you want. And they're like, who colored it? And I said, Dave Stewart. They're like, we want him to color it. So
Always.
but I think it works really well because of that. Like my story's in black and white, and then their story. So every story has a different flavor to it, and I think that works really well.
That's a good point. Yeah. This is this the second time that you've worked with Phil Balsman, Eric, or?
Well, he designed the Geen book, and he designed this. He's done He's done some other trades for us at Albatross. He did the Pug Davis collection, and I think some of the Goon stuff. But yeah, we've been working with him for a while.
I mean, he does an amazing job on this, and Geen, of course, it's right in that same creepy style. It worked very well.
Yeah, it's except that one's real life, which is kind of more frightening.
Yeah, it's not really a Christmas story, is it?
So what's interesting, I was telling Eric that we actually he and I did a chat at CBR 18 years ago, a reader chat, and I only had a vague memory of it. I went and found it in an old flash drive. And what's funny in that, Eric, is it mentions obviously, as you might imagine, the readers were all, when are you going to do more Marvel? When are you going to do more DC?
Yeah.
And what's interesting, you really haven't since then.
Well,
but Becky, obviously, you're doing an amazing job on your DC work. So, what is your particular positions on why, Eric, you haven't really done?
Well, I think that's a bit of a two-way street. One, on my end, I've been busy doing my own stuff, and on the other side of it, I came out pretty hard for creator-owned comics, and kind of campaigned and was trying to draw more attention to it. And I think it rubbed some people the wrong way because I was jokingly kind of crapping on Marvel and DC a little bit. For the record, though, and of course, it's the hierarchy there is completely changed. So it's not the same people. But at the time, Marvel had a much better sense of humor about it than DC did. DC didn't. Those guys did not have a sense of humor at all. And I'm like, if you're working in comic books, maybe you should have a little bit of sense of humor about yourself. But anyway, yeah, so I think that's it. I think I stopped getting as many offers because of that. And and when something would come up, I just didn't have time to really.
Right.
I did some covers here and there, but that's been about it. I did a couple of short stories, I think, for Marvel. I remember doing a Doctor Doom story in something. And I recently did a short story in the Alex Ross book. I did a Spider-Man and the Thing story. I think it was like an 8-pager or something. But that's been the last thing, I think.
And what about you, Becky? Like, why that balance? Is it important to do some creator and out, or?
Yeah, I think, sometimes you just get a job and it just sounds fun. It's hard to turn down. So I think my life has just been a series. I've done some work for DC and I've done some work for Marvel, but I never felt like I've had a consistent, I never feel like I'm there for a very long stretch of time. It'd be like a couple years. And then I'll do something else. And then I'd go back for I think Marvel, my longest thing there was The Punisher. And other than that, I've done like a bunch of short things for them, but I've never had besides The Punisher, like a consistent thing with them. And of course, DC, I was pretty busy for the last 2 years, but everything wrapped up pretty organically, earlier this year. So it kind of left me free to pursue more creator-owned stuff again, which has been nice. And I feel like it's fun to have the option that you can go back and you can, play around in the sandbox. But I've never felt like it's something that I should put that's not the basket I want my eggs in,
of course. Right.
But it is, I've always had fun working with those characters, of course. And it's one of those things where I don't ever think I'll be 100% like a superhero person, but I do enjoy it every once in a while to get in there for a little bit and mess around.
We're doing right now on CBR. We're counting. We had everyone vote on their favorite characters, and after not being in the top 50 last year, Cass and Stephanie are both in there.
They're back at it. Oh, heck yeah! That's what I like to hear. They're great.
That's definitely coincidence. I don't think so.
I think not. I'm going to tell Michael he's downstairs right now.
So, as you said, Becky, Eric personally pitched this to you, this story,
Yeah,
this
yeah.
volume.
And
Okay.
you know, when Eric Powell calls, you answer. You know.
That feels like a jab.
No, it's true. Like it's going to be a cool project. Like you do, like all your books are rad. You know, it's like you have this great idea. Like no matter how hard it was for to wrangle us cats, you really did it. And if you wanted to do it again next year, if you were crazy enough to be like, let's make this a yearly thing, I would be like, call me again, and I will answer again. Yeah, it's just a super fun concept. Working with your friend, like I feel like comics, when you've been doing comics like, as long as we have, sometimes you get a little burnt out, and you like it's lonely. You're sitting in your room all day alone, like staring at the wall, or being like, this is great, but I'm lonely. So why not be lonely together and like make some books?
Yeah.
It's like it just feels like this is what I used to feel when I was doing comics, like for the first time. Like it energized me about it. It made me like when people's stories started coming in, when Eric, you started sending out pictures of like what everyone's characters look like, it was like, oh heck yeah, like this is super, like this is why I am doing comics, and like why I'm still doing it is because I can still get excited about it, and I can still like, I don't know, it's so much fun. It's creatively nourishing. It's inspiring to see everyone's like raising the bar for everyone else. It just makes you want to be better and do better work, and tell stories, like sit around a fire and tell ghost stories.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the real fun part for me too, because I write and draw my own material, so really I don't have any interaction creatively unless I'm writing for somebody else. And we were all doing our own things, but it did feel like that kind of thing when you're a teenager and you have friends that draw and you're over at their house and you're drawing, so you're like, look at this, look what that was totally the vibe. And that was definitely the most fun thing about it.
Yeah. I think sometimes when you see how this is made, it loses some of the magic. So it's nice to get some of that back when you're working with friends.
I like the framing sequence, sort of. Also, I love as you say, the camaraderie of everyone trashing each other's story.
It's so good. I was cackling when I read that. Oh my God.
I just couldn't, when I was writing it, I couldn't think of a way like, well, okay, we're going to transition from each story. What's the reaction going to be? Are they going to be scared? Are they going to whatever? And then I was like, no, they're jerks. They should just crap on everyone else's story. So that's how that came about. But yeah, it seemed like the only logical way to do it.
That whole framing sequence is like, some anthologies, I like the theme is there, but this, like having that sequence, like that's the whole, all those characters and the way you told it, it just like made the whole thing feel like even more satisfying. And when you get to the end, I was just like, I died. It was like, I can't believe I'm in this book. It's so good.
Yeah, I had some art difficulties with the framing segment, though. I had a paper problem where I went through and inked the whole story, and I was doing it in a different style. So I went through and I was going to do this really scratchy inking style. And then, but to bring it all together, I was going to do the really kind of detailed wash. You can kind of see my intentions if you in the back of the book. It's got bios, and those are the original drawings that I did of all of us, and that's kind of what I was going for, or my intention to go for. And then when you look at it, as I said, I was going through and I inked the whole thing, and then I went back to do the washes on it. And the paper, I don't know what happened with this paper, but it immediately just turned to mud.
Oh.
So I went through and I was doing a lot of just trying to paint over it a little bit with whitewash and then doing replacement panels on watercolor paper and stuff.
No.
It was rough. It came together okay, but it was I wish I could do it over again.
Yeah. People say trust the process. Man, sometimes you cannot trust the process.
No.
So then we just have to like make it happen.
Right.
Despite the process.
Especially when you're working with deadlines and stuff. You just have to go with it, have to make it happen however it's going to happen.
Sometimes the comic is left in a taxi. That's
right.
That's interesting when you your style obviously in the two stories here, and also even like your typical Goon stuff and Ed Gein. How do you decide which style to use on each, story?
It's all feel, it's like, what is the atmosphere that I'm going for here with the Gein book? I think I thought about doing that book in color for all of 30 seconds, because all of the reference, it's all old, photography from Life, black and white photography from Life magazine or the newspapers and everything. And I was like, there's no way this book can be in color. It has to be in black and white. It has to fit that vibe. It has to kind of feel like, you're reading an old newspaper. That even went down to the texture of the paper that we chose, where I didn't put it on slick paper. I put it on a matte finish paper that kind of had more of that. It's a better quality than newsprint. Obviously, it's good paper, but it has that kind of dull, sheen to it where it's not, glossy.
Well, even then within Gein, there are multiple different styles for different points of the book too.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. Like, when he's having his fantasies, we wanted it to look like a pulp, adventure story or something like that. So I had used the, kind of printing dot patterns and things like that.
Yeah, that's good effect. I was actually interesting while rereading by chance of Providence, Becky. I read them all when they were, $5. I read them all when they were little books originally.
Yeah, the little mini comics.
Yeah, they were amazing. And did you know that they were going to be collected or was it just, as you say, something fun that you were doing that?
Yeah, I never thought I'd collect them. When I did the first one, doing a second one wasn't on my mind after I did the first one. It was just kind of like, I ended up doing one a year for 3 years.
Right.
And a lot of it was just because I was like trying to get writing work and no one would hire me because I hadn't written anything. So it was like, well, I guess I got to learn how to do this.
I'll just win an Eisner with one.
I collected it first as like I collected it first as a graphic novel, like a 6x9 graphic novel that I self-published. And then I think I was just talking with Eric Stevenson and he like at a con or something and he was just like, just bring it to Image. Like, why don't you just do it in Image? And I was like, I don't know. Like, nobody asked me. Like, is that something I can do? Like, it's just, it never really occurred to me. And those comics are all at like the weird, like, I don't even know what range, like, how big did I draw them? Like, I think they're slightly smaller than normal comic size. But I had to like reformat them to fit the mini comic size. And then I had to like reformat them again to fit the 6x9, and then I had to reformat them again to be the bigger size. So it's just been like a constant reformatting issue with that book. But yeah, that was cool Lee Luridge brought the colors to that. When I did that in color, I asked him to do it. And I kind of already had like one layer of gray, like there's like, it's like black, white with one gray tone. And so he kind of used that as like the middle tone. So it came out great. Yeah. Happy with it.
Oh yeah, gorgeous. That's so funny that you mentioned. I was doing an article about John Romita, and he had a fascinating bit about partially why he went to Marvel after his DC romance comic stopped. Is that no one at DC talked to him, and he didn't feel like asking anyone, and so he said, "I guess DC doesn't want me."
Yeah,
and how much of that comes from just, as you say, you just bump into Eric at a time and say, hey.
Yeah, you just don't think about it. I don't know. It's not
Yeah,
like I'm not sure. Yeah, it's it's a mystery to me, but it's nice that it happened.
okay, guys. Unless you have anything that you guys just want to discuss about, I guess we can just let everyone know December 19th, four gathered on Christmas Eve.